who is there for us? Rishi Sunak was there for 11 hours. He went on his government plane. King Charles is there. He went on a separate taxpayer-funded jet. And Lord Cameron, David Cameron, the new Foreign Secretary, went on a third taxpayer-funded jet. This is not the Falkland Islands. This is not St Helena. This is Dubai, a very busy air route with planes coming in every hour from all over the world, a huge number of scheduled flights daily. And the host, the United Arab Emirates, what is their policy on climate change? Or, as some media now call it as a matter of course, the climate emergency. Well, the BBC has actually reported that leaked documents have revealed plans by the UAE to use the 10-day international summit to discuss fossil fuel deals with 15 nations. COP28 President Sultan Al Jaber, he has denied that. What definitely is true is that he has another role as well as head of COP28. He is head of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. And that is a company which has big plans to increase its capacity of oil production by 680,000 barrels a day of capacity, making it the second biggest oil producer after Saudi Arabia. It'll be ramping up oil production by 42%. That is what the United Arab Emirates is doing. So as Britain freezes, a village in Cumbria was -9 degrees Celsius yesterday. We were being lectured by people flying in to COP28, this environmental conference in Dubai, in their private jets. And they're telling you to turn your heating down because you're destroying the planet. Let's debate this now. Donoghue McCarthy is a climate columnist and a very good man who really believes what he's saying, even though we often disagree. And I really admire Donoghue for many reasons. And Ben Pyle is with us as well, another good man. He's co-founder of the Climate Debate UK. And Ben, I must apologise to you because we were right in the heat of the debate last week when, very sadly, Terry Venables died and I had to cut you off. So I'm delighted to have you back on the programme today, and thank you for doing that. Donoghue, perhaps I could start with you. What is the point of COP28?
Good morning, Peter. It's a UN process that was set up 30 years ago to tackle the carbon emissions that are causing climate breakdown. However, as a UN process, it has to include every member of the UN, and it has to have a consensus. And the problem with that is that there are around 20 petro dictatorships, including the United Arab Emirates that you rightly referred to, who have a veto on actually the COP making the decisions that are needed to cut emissions. It's met now for 30 years, and every year after the COP, the emissions have continued to go up. And Britain is part of that as one of the biggest funders of fossil fuels globally. And Rishi Sunak, as a Prime Minister advocating maxing out fossil fuels, has been a key underminer of the COP process.
Well, Rishi Sunak has pointed to the fact that in the UK we're far ahead of many other countries and has committed to net zero in a different way to was originally envisaged, certainly. But isn't Britain ahead of other nations in this? He says he's very proud to be a COP and says that Britain has done quite a lot to change things in terms of its carbon emissions.
What Britain has done is actually addressed the carbon emissions of its electricity grid, which it has cut by over half because we were dependent totally on coal. We've now moved to cheaper renewables and actually and energy efficiency, and that has been a success story. However, in every other area, according to the government's climate advisors, whether it's transport, flying, agriculture, housing, heating, we are way behind the targets needed. But it's not just the Britain's carbon emissions, Peter, which are important here. We are as a small nation of 60 million people, we emit around 1% of global emissions. However, we are responsible for 15% of global investments in new fossil fuels, which are trashing the climate, and we're responsible for 50% of global insurance. So we have a huge responsibility due to the City of London's finances of this destruction.
Ben Pyle, Donoghue is right in that he says a consensus is needed in any UN body. This is where we have absurd things like Iran being temporarily head of the sort of Human Rights Commission, Human Rights Committees and so on at the UN. It's absurd and offensive to many people. But at the same time, there is a lot for these countries to do. They're just not going to do it, are they? Narendra Modi is interesting, the Indian Prime Minister, saying that he wants COP to come to them next year. India is, of course, the third biggest emitter of emissions worldwide. I think I'm right in that. But is there any point in these actual jamborees? 10 days, people flying in on their private jets. I find it pretty galling to see not just our own politicians, but many from around the world lecturing us when actually they're not exactly practicing what they preach.
Yeah, well, some people call it not hypocrisy, but hierarchy. There's a sense in which these people are telling us to do what they tell us to do, not to do what they do. And of course, that's environmentalism all around. I would say, I'd pick up your point and say that, it's quite offensive that Iran is going to be heading the human rights body of the UN. I think the UN itself is somewhat offensive, and the 30-year process that Donoghue quite rightly sort of explains. It was created precisely to avoid democratic control of these policies. It's all very well and good, Donoghue taking responsibility on our behalf for 15% of global emissions and whatever he imagines the consequences of that to be that are negative. I think they're probably quite positive. Britain's role in creating industry has saved billions of people's lives and made billions of people's lives possible. But the construction of the UN was the IPCC and the UNFCCC, which this meeting is part of, is an attempt to take control away from governments going forward by everyone signing up to these agreements, these sort of agreements to limit the amount of CO2 emissions there. It has failed, which is the good thing. It failed in 2015, which when we had the Paris Agreement, which allows everyone thereafter to decide what their own levels of emissions reduction are going to be. And so we've seen quite a development since then of things failing and of policies.
Let's let Donoghue reply to that, Ben. I'll bring you in a second as well. I also, Donoghue, you said that renewables are cheap. I mean, that hasn't been the case, certainly in terms of setting them up, has it? And also, we use quite a low number of renewable. Well, I suppose you would argue we need to use more. But I mean, if you look at those, you can look at the grid, the national grid, see exactly what it's using. Often renewables are a very, very low portion of that, and the outlay to get them set up and the technology costs a lot of money.
In the first quarter of 2023, 47% of the grid was supplied by renewables. It's a success story. Yes, there are days where renewables don't supply the entire grid, but we actually need to invest in storage to accommodate those type of days. For the last 8 years, I think it's 8 years. Don't fact check me on that. But for quite a number of years now, renewables have not required subsidy. What has required subsidy over the last year was we poured £60 billion into the fossil fuel industry when we had a fossil fuel crisis. The problem with keeping us addicted to the fossil fuel global markets is it leaves us exposed to massive spikes in inflation. We've seen this, Peter, almost every decade since the 70s. And what we should be doing is actually investing in storage, efficiency, and renewables. My home, I just got my bill the other day, and for my utilities for the last year, for gas, water, and electricity, I'm making a net profit of minus £200. I want that for everybody.
They're paying you, Donoghue.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I get paid for the electricity export to the grid, and I use so little that I'm actually a net exporter.
How are you making that electricity? Have you got solar panels or what's happening?
Solar electricity, and I live in a small house. I'm a one-person household, so I've super insulated the house, and actually that means that I'm actually a net exporter. I've got electric heating and electric cooking, and that's what we need for everybody in this country. What we should do is what I think Rishi Sunak's point is valid, is that the poor should not pay the price for this. And what is exemplified by your example of all these people flying around in the billionaires flying around in their private jets lecturing us is absolutely correct. The millionaire class emit massive amounts of carbon, and we need to tackle that immediately.
Well, let's hear from a member of that class, actually, because I just want to hear what King Charles has been saying over the last couple of days. He is at COP. Let's play this clip.
Some important progress has been made, but It worries me greatly that we remain so dreadfully far off track, as the Global Stocktake report demonstrates so graphically. The dangers are no longer distant risks.
He's dreadfully worried, yet he took a taxpayer-funded jet to go to the United Arab Emirates. Roger has been in touch to say Emirates Airlines has 7 A380 flights daily to Dubai from Heathrow, as well as British Airways has 3 services. I think Roger's looked this up. Thank you, Roger. Surely Sunak and Cameron could have flown on commercial flights, leaving just 1 private jet necessary to be used by King Charles. I mean, this is in micro and in macro, a lot of this is appalling. A lot of people will find this very difficult to swallow, Ben.
Well, they should. I think they should also treat Donoghue's words with a little bit of scepticism as well. He says that energy isn't subsidised, and yet he gets paid to have solar panels on his roof or whatever it is. Of course, they're subsidised.
I paid to put them in, and I'm paid by my energy company for what I sell to them.
Yeah, why don't Greens ever let anyone else speak? It's pathological, perhaps. Energy is subsidized. Green energy is subsidized. We're still paying renewable energy producers under the ROC scheme from the 2000s, and we're paying people under the contracts for different schemes. So it's this complete lie to say that green energy is not subsidized, and it's a complete myth to say that fossil fuels are subsidized. In this country, we don't pay any subsidies. We pay the same reduced rates of VAT, perhaps, on domestic energy, but that's not a producer subsidy. So yeah, I think people do need to treat everything, all the claims that are made in this debate, not just from Prince Charles, also from Rishi Sunak and Antonio Guterres, who's changed his line. His last year was global boiling, and this year it's climate collapse. And the billionaires that dominate in places like COP28 and of course COP26 prior to that, and COP27, like Michael Bloomberg. Why are all these extremely wealthy people, these extremely rich green billionaires who fund a lot of these organizations and lobbying for all of these policies domestically and internationally? Why are they there? Why is this process not democratic? And I would say that the undemocratic nature of both the UN and the climate agenda is what draws all these people to it.
There is definitely at least some degree of scaremongering. I just want to read this out from Terry in Slough. Hi Peter, I'm in my 70s, and this is what the so-called climate experts have said in my lifetime. 1960s, oil all gone in a few years. 1970s, another ice age in a few years. 1980s, acid rain will destroy all crops in a few years. 1990s, the ozone layer will be gone in a few years. 2000, ice caps will be gone in a few years. As far as I'm aware, none of this has actually happened. Donoghue.
Yeah, that's a very common meme on the internet. And Peter, you're an intelligent person. You know very well what the facts are behind most of those issues. So let's pick 3 of them. Ozone layer, an international agreement by international communities signed up to a treaty to phase out ozone damaging chemicals. It worked. Acid rain, international agreement to phase out sulfur acid coming out of our power stations. We implemented it. It worked. It got dealt with. And as regards the 3rd one about ice melting, well, we've just had the reports from Antarctica where we have it's record low, where an area the size of Germany and France put together is now melting beyond normal levels. It is happening, and what you've just outlined is evidence that when the international community acts, we can be successful. And what all 3 of us agree with is that the billionaire hypocrisy is untenable, and secondly, the COP process is broken. And so what we need to do is to do what we did successfully with acid rain and with the ozone layer, which were threats to humanity and to nature, is to find a system where we can implement the actions necessary. And the one action that's necessary is to stop the banks investing in new fossil fuels and to invest it in energy efficiency and cheaper green energy, so people in this country can be warm and they can actually heat their homes without an energy that's not touching the planet.
Okay, Ben, I promise I'll bring you in again in a minute, but I just want to talk to Stuart in Kidderminster, who's given me a call on 0344 499 1000. Stuart, what is your point? You've got Donoghue and Ben listening to you, and me as well. You're very welcome to the programme this morning.
I'm afraid I have to moderate my language because I'm on television. The thing is, Sunak's gone over there saying investing £1.6 billion into it. It's not going to affect taxpayers. I don't know where it's coming from. Also, I've seen an advert for the Salvation Army, people living out on the streets in this cold weather. What he wants to do is come back over to this country, sort it out, and put those people into hotels, not like all the migrants have been. It's just absolutely disgusting. He couldn't care less about the public. He's on a world stage trying to look big, and he's very short anyway.
OK, Stuart, that's a pretty strong point. Ben, what do you make of this? Is this just people bestriding the world stage? Will anything actually change, do you think?
Yeah, we've got a lot of problems here in the UK, and it does seem to me that this prancing around on global stages is something of an attempt to distract from that. We've got the migrant crisis, as your caller said, and we've got housing crises possibly as a result of that. We've got energy price crises, and there should be proper debates about that, both on media and in politics, and that we've got a worsening economic situations of all kinds. But yeah, I mean, politicians in recent governments have always preferred to go around. They've always preferred the international stage rather than the confronting domestic politics, and so they've always preferred the idea of climate change and war. Those have been the preoccupations of well, I would say degenerate politicians.
Wow. Okay.
They're not really interested in day-to-day life. They're not really interested in
we are
what most people in the country need to. Again, I'm being interrupted.
Well, let's just get Donogha's view very briefly because we're running out of time. But Donogha, in a couple of sentences, if you would.
Yeah, I think I am very much interested in people's day-to-day life. I want the insulation program for 9 million people that was cut to be restored so poor people can have warm homes. I want the above inflation fares that the government imposed on public transport to be reversed so poor people can afford public transport. I want the bus systems that 80% of the bus services across the country that government cut, I want those restored. I want the taxes on green electricity that's imposed on poor people to be removed. I am interested in making it cheaper for poor people to be greener and warmer. That's what I'm interested in.